Hey, good morning, happy Monday. We get another week to continue building the lives and the careers that we desire. You can see here, different setup. This week I'm actually back in Michigan, and next week I'll be back in Michigan as well. So hence the different setup. But I'm excited because having the whiteboard for this is going to be a lot better. So what we're going to cover today is multi-perspective and consequential thinking. And so this video is very focused on how can you continue to make better decisions in every area of your life by having a proven framework that you can run processes through. If you have a certain situation, you know you're going to have to make an important decision, you can use a system like this, multi-perspective and consequential thinking, in order to know that you're making a really good decision. And obviously we want to make good decisions because that's going to determine what we do and ultimately our lives. So there are four main things that we're going to cover in this video. So the first is we're going to cover the difference between objective and subjective realities. And then we're going to define what is perspective and then understanding what is multi-perspective thinking. And so that's going to cover the two and put them together. And then the third point is understanding ordered consequences and applying consequential thinking when we're trying to make a decision. And then the final part is we're going to take the multi-perspective and the consequential thinking and talk about how do we use these together to form hypotheses, to strategize about what could be all the different options that we have and which ones are the best, and then ultimately how do we then take that and then make a decision. So I'm super excited to dive in, and let's get started. All right, so to start, we're going to talk about objective and subjective reality and the differences between them. Now, this may sound, meta. Why are we talking about objective reality versus subjective reality? And what does that even mean? It's so important to understand what is truth and what is the interpretation of truth. And when we're thinking about our perspectives, our decision making, how our decisions are going to affect everyone else. But in order to be able to think through all of those second and third iterations of the decision, we need to first understand how are we making the decision and what is that decision based on. And it's either going to be based on objective and or subjective realities. So objective reality, you can think of that as something that is truth. And it's factual. And you can think of it more so as law, not theory. And you can also think of it as non-biased. So a simple example would be if I were to tell you that some event happened in history 10 years ago, well, objectively, everybody that I'm talking to or anyone else in the world could know that, all right, yes, 10 years ago, objectively, this thing happened. An example would be there was, once upon a time, a Roman Empire. Well, objectively, everyone knows that that's true. And that's because it's not based on my thoughts about something. It's based on something actually happening. Now, if someone were to say, well, the Roman Empire was the best empire in history. Well, now they've introduced a different part of the situation. And really what they're doing is they're using an objective reality and combining their opinion to it. And so this is objective. Again, it's non-biased, it's law or factual, it's truth. It's something that everybody can agree on because you can't argue with the facts. Think of it as proven evidence. But when someone introduces an opinion or their thoughts on something objectively, now that gets into the realm of subjective reality, and that's what we're going to break down right now. All right, so now subjective reality, as I briefly mentioned, is going to be our interpretation of the world, our interpretation of objective reality. So interpretation. And you can also think of it as opinion / biased. And you can also think of it as individual experience. Of objective reality. So this is super important. Think of, why do you get into arguments? Why do you get into debates? Why do you get into discussions where your viewpoint is going to be totally different than someone else's viewpoint? And really, when you think about why do intimate or personal or friendship or family relationships, why do so many relationships end? It's usually because people's individual subjective realities, their interpretations of the world, their beliefs, their values. And that's the other thing, is that their reality is based on their beliefs, their values, and ultimately their thoughts. Because what you believe and what you value is going to directly influence your thoughts. And think of it, when you see or experience the world, kind of, for example, if you didn't have eyes, you wouldn't be able to know what is 10 feet in front of you. So you wouldn't actually think about something 10 feet in front of you because you can see it. So we have 5 senses to literally take in information objectively from our world. But all that information has to be filtered by our brain. It needs to make sense of what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, what is worthwhile, what's a waste of time, who's a nice person, who's a mean person, what is politically correct, what is not politically correct. Every decision that our brain needs to make is running filters in order to make sense of the world, in order to know what decision to make. So, subjectively, all of us are experiencing life in very different ways. So imagine if you were to put 10 people in a room and something happens in that room, based on everybody's individual experience of that thing, you're going to have 10 different opinions about what happened. And that's kind of, when you think about news, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole too far, but imagine that you have 6 different news reporters at one event. Well, those news reporters are going to be all pretty much sharing different types of news, well, based on their edge of the story. And their edge of the story is pretty much based on their interpretation of the story. So it's very important to know, am I making a decision based on my subjective reality, based on my individual interpretation and the meaning that I'm getting out of something? Or is it based on objective reality, which is the factual evidence, totally non-biased, something that everybody can agree on? Now let's talk about how these two interact with one another. And so that's going to bring us to the point number 2, defining perspective and understanding multi-perspective thinking. All right, so now we can talk about what is perspective. Now, because we just covered subjective reality, a lot of people confuse subjective reality with perspective. And the way that you can think of the difference between these two is subjective reality is something that's always happening. It's something that it's a continuous experience of that someone has of the world. But what perspective is think of perspective as a snapshot or one individual point in time or one individual situation, because we have a perspective on one thing. Or maybe, there's multiple things that we're talking about and we have a perspective on all the individual things. But perspective, again, it's your interpretation of one specific thing. Now, your perspective and everybody else's perspectives is, based on their subjective reality. And so what that means is someone's perspective is heavily influenced and really formed based on these 4 primary points. So the first is beliefs and values. Now, in this video, it's outside scope to go into, how are all these things formed? But the most important thing to know is that if you're making a decision and there's other people that have their thoughts and opinions on something, know that everybody has different backgrounds. Everybody grew up with different experiences, different education, different parents, different friend groups, different leaders or mentors, just a totally different environment and different inputs into their lives and different relationships. So all that is going to heavily influence someone's beliefs and values, and that stays with them long term unless they change them. And then the third part is experience or memory. And what this third point means is if someone has different background experience, let's use a professional example. So let's say that you're on a team and that team is working on a project and they need to make a decision as to how to allocate money. Well, or the budget of the team. Well, everybody's going to have different background experience about what worked well and what did not. And so you might have differing opinions on how that money should best be allocated or invested, because people have different experiences and different recollections of the past. And what someone's past is going to directly influence how they think about the present and the future. So this is also why there's, if you think of diversity recruiting in the workplace, it's a lot of people believe diversity is just ethnicity or gender, but it's diversity in experience and diversity in beliefs, values, and experiences. It's super important. Diversity in mindset. And then the last point is self-interest, goals, or outcomes. And really what this means is in any given situation where people need to make a decision, everybody has self-interests. Everybody's thinking about themselves, their families, their income, their future career path within the company, or maybe the future of the relationship. If this is let's say it's an intimate relationship, it's really important to remember that in any given situation, everybody has underlying self-interest that are going to be influencing their perspective on whatever it is that they're making a decision on. So then that leads us to multi-perspective thinking, which is taking this and applying it to an actual decision-making framework. So you've already done this hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times in your life. But the difference is can you consciously use this next time that you have to make a decision rather than maybe sometimes using it. And so how we can think about multi-perspective thinking is in the center here, you're going to have some situation. Because remember, a perspective is your interpretation of one specific event or one specific thing that's happening, one situation. So we can call this the objective situation. And yes, this is going to start going sideways here because we're right inside. Anyways, so you're going to have in the center here some objective situation. But then you're going to have let's say this is you here, your subjective perspective of the event. So this is you. There you are. All right. So now what's important is in most situations, especially if it's dealing with other people, you're not going to be the only one that's affected or is a part of this situation. And so what we need to do is know that other people also have perspectives. Boom. Cool. So let's say that in the workplace, let's assume that you're a CEO. And let's say that this company has 100 million cash on hand for the whole year. And so over 12 months, you need to think through how are you going to be best allocating or investing or returning value to shareholders using this $100 million. Well, let's say that this is the CMO. Then you have your CFO. Then let's say that you've got your COO. And let's say that you have someone in Rev, so CRO if you want. And then let's say you have a CTO, technology officer. And let's say that you are the CEO. Cool. And I know I'm missing a couple people, that would ideally be on the team. But anyway, so let's say that you have the $100 million. Well, if you just go with your initial thoughts, you might be missing some really crucial information or a viewpoint that without that consideration, you might make maybe not the best decision. And that's why you have a team, because they also generate ideas and they give you perspective that you might have missed or not thought of yourself. And so when we think about multi-perspective thinking, you can think of it as you're going to start. So one is understand your perspective. And what you want to do is take out all of the emotion. You literally want to think of this as, I'm going to detach my emotional pull in whatever this decision is so that I can logically think through what is going to be the best decision. Because whenever we get caught up in our own, or we start debating or talking or arguing with anyone else, they literally start just bringing too much emotion to the decision. And so instead what you want to do is say, I'm not going to have the emotion. I'm going to detach myself, think logically, and instead I'm going to focus on this, the objective situation. So when all you're doing is focusing on the facts, the evidence, the truth, and taking out the bias, taking out the emotion of the decision, you're going to think more clearly about what do you actually believe is the best decision. And then what you want to do is structure questions. And you want to question everyone else on the team, or let's say that it's you and a friend, or you and a relationships, or you and one specific colleague. It'd be the exact same thing. Your perspective is going to be different than your colleagues, or your perspective is going to be different than your boss's. And all these perspectives are influenced by all these different people's subjective realities. So once you understand your perspective, your job then is to ask questions and understand others' perspectives. All right. Now, this is super important again because remember, all of these other people are going to have their own beliefs, values, experiences, and most importantly, self-interest. If you only went to the chief marketing officer, well, that marketing officer, he or she, is probably going to say, well, that money would best be used by putting it into marketing. Let's go grow the company. Let's get more revenue. Let's expand to new markets. Or let's do a brand new campaign and let's bring in this partnership deal, and all of a sudden the money starts racking up. Or if you were to only go to the CFO, well, the CFO would say, well, looking at the numbers, I really believe that we could pay out dividends or buy back some stock, or maybe we have enough to look at some inorganic growth strategies, maybe some M&A. There's a lot of competitors right now. Valuations are low. It might be a good idea. So if there's all these people are going to, chief technology officer, well, we should be investing in our infrastructure. We've got some old technology. We need to upgrade our servers or our cloud. Chief revenue officer is, well, let's put more money into R&D. Let's create a new product line or a new service line. And then a COO is going to say, well, let's continue optimizing. And maybe we need to invest into more property, plant, and equipment. We need to open new facilities or a new manufacturing plant or expand into a different country. So there's all these different potential ideas and differing perspectives about what is important. And so let's say that you're the leader. Well, it's going to be your job to, one, first form your own thought. You need to have your own opinion, but it doesn't mean that your opinion is right just because it's yours. That's just your one perspective. So then you ask the questions and understand all of these other perspectives and their logic behind them. And you don't want to get sucked into, maybe you favorite the CMO or the COO and you don't like as much the CRO, the CTO, or the CFO. The moment that you start bringing the emotion into this analysis or into this thought process, which is obviously not what you want to do, you want to take out the emotion. But when you start making emotional decisions, you're going to start playing favorites. And just because you like someone more doesn't mean that they're the best, the most believable person or the most experienced person in a situation. So you want to take out the bias. Ask questions that are going to lead you to objective truth and logic from all these different people's perspectives. And then the third thing that you want to do, once you understand your own perspective and you've asked questions and understood everyone else's perspectives, then you want to go into consequential thinking. And I want to mention one last point here. This is called empathy. A lot of people get confused about EQ versus IQ. What is empathy? Empathy is also, I want to mention, empathy is not the same as sympathy. Empathy is not the same as compassion. Empathy just means you understand other people's perspectives. You understand how they are seeing the situation. So empathy doesn't mean you're saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I totally understand, I'm so sorry it had to be this way. Empathy would be something along the lines of, I can see I can see why you believe that. You're not agreeing with or disagreeing with someone else's situation. All you're saying is, I get it, or I understand, or I can see why you would believe that. You're validating the fact that you can understand why they came to that conclusion about this objective situation. All right, so now let's talk about consequential thinking. So what that means is that for every action, you're going to have a consequence. And you can think of it as for every input, there's going to be at least one or more outputs. And so this action is going to lead to an immediate consequence. And then that consequence is going to be the input for another consequence. And then that consequence is going to be an input to another consequence, and so on and so on and so on. And so you can think of that almost as a ripple effect, or an example would be, let's say that today you decide to eat more healthily. Well, if you eat more healthily, maybe consequence number one is it doesn't taste that good, but you know it's healthy for you. And so you continue doing this first order consequence, which is if I eat more healthily now, it might not taste good, but it's healthy for me. Well, the second order consequence would be you're eating more healthily, and so you have a lot more energy, you're a lot more confident, you feel better about yourself, you're either gaining muscle or losing weight, or physically you are improving your body. Well, then, all right, so if you have more energy and you're improving your body, well then the next consequence would be your confidence increases, or your ability to be more productive or to focus for longer hours. Or maybe it's because this confidence increases or this energy increases, well then the next consequence would be outperformance. Or maybe you have the confidence to talk to someone that you've wanted to talk to, or voice your opinion at the table where you haven't before. And so it's most people, and actually I did a video on this talking about decision making primarily based on purpose or pleasure, and most people put pleasure over purpose. And so in that scenario, this would be, I decide to eat food that's not good for me. Well, I do that because it's cheap, it's easy, and it tastes good. Well, that's the immediate consequence. It's cheap, it's easy, and it tastes good. Well, what most people don't think about is, what is the second order consequence? What happens if I keep doing this? Well, I'm going to be low energy. I'm going to feel bad about myself. I'm not going to be as confident as I could be. And the health deteriorates. And I'm not going to go into long-term consequences like 20, 30 years of what happens to your body and all the diseases that we have with bad diets. But it all starts with this thinking through, if I do this today, what is the immediate consequence today, or short-term consequence? But then that's going to have a ripple effect into a second consequence, and so on and so forth. So this is super important for every part of our lives. Whether it's a personal or intimate relationship, if it's a work relationship with one specific colleague or a boss or a manager, or maybe even a subordinate or someone who works below you. Or maybe this is a strategic decision for investing. So maybe you say, all right, going back to this example, we have $100 million and you're the CEO, and you need to know, okay, if we go with one decision, short term, what's going to be that effect? And then how is this going to affect us longer term? So maybe this is a 3-month consequence, but then that 3-month consequence is going to put us in direction to be here 12 months from now. And then if we're here 12 months from now, well, that's going to affect us later on down the road, 18 months or 24 months down the road. So now where this gets really interesting and really important is this is only assuming one decision. And so now what we want to do is we want to stack on top of that other options. So now if this is let's say idea number 1. Well, then we're going to have idea number 2. All right, well, if we do this instead, how's that going to affect us here? And then how's that going to affect us as in the future, longer term, and then even longer term, and so on and so forth. And then we could say, all right, well, idea number 3. If we take this action today, what is going to be the short-term effect? What's going to be, call this, the second effect or the second order consequence? What's going to be the third effect or the third consequence? And where's that going to take us going forward? And so you can start to see, and we'll talk about the hypothesizing, strategizing, and deciding, but this is consequential thinking. Is there's an objective situation, and we are going to be making a decision, and that decision is going to lead to a first, a second, a third, and so on and so on and so on consequences. And so what we need to do is not lock ourselves just short term. And this is where most people make decisions, is right here in this first order consequence field. But instead, we really want to be focusing on third order consequences. And if you think of people like Jeff Bezos or Reed Hastings of Netflix, Steve Jobs with Apple, all these incredible people, and those are just three examples that come to my mind off the top of my head. But Warren Buffett, or even Oprah, or think of the Whitney of Bumble that just came out, and she just IPO'd, and she's now the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. She had a vision of knowing where she was taking the company and was making decisions 5-6 years in advance. And Jeff Bezos has been quoted saying he makes decisions 15 years in advance. Reed Hastings, he started with Netflix just shipping out the DVDs, but the entire time he was literally just generating cash so that he could invest in the technology. And he knew that the technology, when he first started the business, was not capable of doing the streaming, but he knew he would be. And so what he was doing is he was thinking where he wanted it to be, and then was reverse engineering back how to actually make that happen. So most of the brilliant thinkers, or the people that are wildly successful, none of them make decisions here. All of them in their mind are playing this game of thinking through, all right, what do I know? What is truth? And also here, so if you've probably heard of first principles thinking. Well, all first principles thinking doing is breaking this further down. Because first principles thinking is breaking apart and understanding and creatively putting it back together. And really that last part, creatively putting it back together, that's really why we use first principles thinking. But the understanding truth, understanding the true objective reality of a situation without infecting it with emotions or any of our own individual beliefs, values, experiences, or self-interest, that's why people use first principles, to make sure they truly do understand the center, this objective reality. But then that's going to help us think through, make a decision, and then ultimately play out idea number 1, idea number 2, idea number 3, and all these different potential scenarios and decisions that we can make, mapping them all the way out. And then ultimately what we want to do to make a decision is we want to be comparing these long-term outcomes. So now kind of that we talked about perspective, we talked about multi-perspective thinking, we talked about consequential thinking, and now the final part is we're going to talk about combining multi-perspective and consequential thinking. All right, so now the final part is combining the multi-perspective and consequential thinking to make the best, most informed decisions that we possibly can in our life, in our career, or in any other specific situations like a project or in a relationship or during an investment if we're investing our own money or trying to make a decision of where to put things. So what's going to happen is you're going to have the objective situation, right? And we already talked about that. And in this objective situation, we're going to have different perspectives. Well, this means that we're going to make a decision which is going to lead to the first order consequence. And within that consequence is going to affect all the different perspectives. And then that consequence is going to lead to another consequence, which is also going to affect the different perspectives, and so on. And this is, let's say, option number 1. Well, this is one decision. And I want to do the third order consequence here. And we're just going to go fast. All right, cool. So that's option number one potential decision. Well, now what we want to do is we want to think through and map out other decisions. So option number 2. And similar thing here. So all these are going to have the same players, so the same perspectives. And I know I'm getting the numbers wrong here, but, 5 here, whatever. You get the point. All right, and then let's say we do a third option. So option number 3. All right. Cool. All right. So now you can see how kind of all of this is put together. So we talked about objectively. What is objective reality? Well, objective reality is this starting point. This is what we're making the decision on. Then we talked about subjective reality, which is going to be all of us have different interpretations of the world. Well, because of that, in any given situation, we're going to have different perspectives. So for every decision or situation, there's going to be all the different people within that situation, all of them at different perspectives. Well, then, based on what decision we make, this is going to affect and lead to a short-term consequence. Well, that short-term consequence is going to affect everybody in the situation still. And so now what we want to do is we want to understand what are all the perspectives in these different consequences. Because if we make this third decision, how is this going to, and if we go back to the $100 million example, you're the CEO and you have your team of leaders. Well, how's that going to, let's say you allocate, wild example, let's just say you allocate all the money to marketing. Well, if you allocate all $100 million to marketing, well, how's that going to affect the CTO or the CRO or the COO or the can't remember the other one that we had on there. But like, you're going to need to think through what's going to be the implications of all these other people. How is it going to affect all these other people? And that's just consequence number 1. Longer term, how's that going to affect us? Well, short term, maybe we have a bump in sales. Hopefully if you're going to allocate $100 million, I hope you're getting more sales out of it. Well, maybe all of that, consequence number 1 is good. All right, we get more sales. Well, now consequence number 2 might be, well, now we're overbooked. We have too much demand and not enough infrastructure support or client support or some other part of the business to be able to support that level of demand. And so because of this is going to lead to a bad customer experience or really long back orders that's going to trash your company's rating or customer reviews. Well, if you have bad customer reviews, well, that's going to lead to a loss in business and a bad reputation, and people might start substituting your product or service to go to a competitor's. And it's all because you didn't think through what are the longer term implications of over allocating way too much money into marketing and not into the other crucial parts of the business. And you can also apply this to your personal life. Let's say you have a group of friends and you need to make a decision for that group of friends. Well, let's say that exact same sequence of events is going to happen. Well, short term, maybe one person's happy and the others aren't. Well, then longer term, how's that going to affect the group? And then longer term, how's that going to affect the group even longer? The third order consequence. So that's just option number 3. But you're going to have multiple different options. Going back to the $100 million example, let's say this is all in on marketing. This one is 50-50 split with marketing and research and development. And then let's say that this is 30% marketing, 20% into expanding operations, 20% into upgrading technology, and then, what was that, 30, 20, 20, and then the final 30% might be a dividend or a share buyback or some other form of returning value to shareholders. So all of these are going to have different long-term pictures, And what we want to do is similarly think through all the perspectives for these different decisions in the third order consequence and then compare that. And this situation is how we want to be making the decisions. And most people, they literally only do this. I mean, this is the extent of most people's maybe 2 or 3. I mean, it's maybe they only think of 3 different options, and they only, again, most people only think of their own perspective. And then they don't even take into consideration other people's perspectives in the future. And so this is really how most people make a decision. Their own perspective, given a situation, and then they think about what will I get in return. They don't consider anyone else, maybe one other person. So, and then they do this in 3 different iterations. So you can see how powerful this would be, especially if you're in a leadership position or a position where your decision is going to be affecting many other people. This is how you want to be making and structuring decisions. So I hope you found this video super helpful. I hope that you're going to be taking the time to sit down, get a blank sheet of paper, and literally just start mapping. What is the situation? What is my perspective? Who are the other people involved? What do I believe their perspectives are? And then if I were to make this one decision, how would that affect everybody immediately? And then the second, and then the third. And you do that with all the different potential decisions. So this will help you financially. This will help you in terms of health and fitness. This is going to help your relationships. And ultimately, we talked about empathy earlier, but it's just going to give you a significantly better understanding of the world, of other people, and your decisions are going to be a lot more logical and thought through as opposed to just emotional reactions to whatever a given situation is. So again, hope you found this helpful, and if you did, please click subscribe or click the bell. I come out with these videos every Monday, and I will see you next week. Have an amazing week.